Hi there and welcome to the Accepted Authority podcast. My name's Greg Roworth and each week I'm your host on this podcast where we discuss challenges around growing your consultancy firm and particularly looking at how you can position your firm as the accepted authority in your market so that you have your premium clients attracted to you, ideally lining up, asking to become your clients, and to be able to grow your professional practice on the basis of that level of authority in your market. Today, I wanted to discuss your responsibility for marketing. And during this podcast, I want to help you identify the level of responsibility that you actually have for marketing your practice and what that really means in tackling the challenges that you may be having now and how you are the one that ultimately needs to be responsible to achieve the results and the success you're looking for in your marketing. Now, where this comes from is that for me, in my personal journey to growing and selling the three professional practices that I have had before this one, for a lot of that time, I didn't take personal responsibility for the marketing. Yes, and let me preface this episode by saying that this podcast is really addressed to owners of small to medium-sized consultancy firms where typically the owners of the firms are involved quite heavily in delivery of the services that you provide, but we're also, you may be the rainmaker for your firm and the one who's responsible for getting the sales. Now, that was my situation in my firms. Obviously, as the founder of each of those firms, I was the one initially that did everything. And I not only had to find my clients, I had to do the delivery of that work until the firm grew and my sales grew to the point where I needed to bring on other staff to help with the delivery of the services that we were providing. And I think that's a fairly typical growth path for most consultancy firms. If they're not started out by a number of partners initially, they're started out by one person, but typically even in the situation where you may have started your firm as a group of partners, in those firms, each partner typically does the work of finding their own clients and delivering the services to those clients. So often we find that firms, and even in the big four firms, I've experienced this, where partners in a firm tend to create silos around them and operate almost independently from each other. Now, there's some overlap in strategy and the way that you work together and organisation of admin and developing support staff to support the individuals doing the work. And then you build a team around yourselves, and maybe at that point, the structure of your business might change to some degree. But ultimately, it will come down to one person having responsibility for sales and marketing. And apart from the individual partners doing what they can in terms of building their own networks and getting referrals from their clients, which obviously they then follow up and try to make the sale. But if you're looking to grow your business beyond the reliance on referrals, then typically one person becomes responsible for that effort in the marketing process. And that's how it was for me right from the start as a solo professional initially, until I brought partners into the business. It was my job to get the sales. Now, when I say my job to get the sales, I think we can all see that we have a responsibility for getting the sales that we need to be able to grow our business. But that doesn't necessarily then translate into having responsibility for the marketing. Because in my situation, I tended to delegate that responsibility to others. I gave that task to a junior person or an external person from our firm. And I think that's a fairly typical way that marketing happens in a lot of consultancy firms. We hand over our social media activities to a junior person and tell them to create content or do posts on social media to promote our firm. And even in our situation where we had people who were responsible for generating leads, that was a process that, because I was initially an accountant and then a consultant, I had not had experience in marketing. So naturally, what I tended to do, and I think for most of us, this is our tendency, is that because we don't know much about marketing, we delegate it to people that we hope can either learn quickly on the job or have some experience. If they're external people, for example, the website designers that we handed over our website to say, well, we're not getting leads from our website. Can you fix that for us? And ended up having to do that 3 times in 2 years because none of those guys made any difference. And then the Facebook experts and the LinkedIn experts come along because we think, well, we need more expertise around that. What we're doing isn't working, so let's hand it over to these guys. And they didn't get results either. And I know that that is a fairly typical situation for many consultants who have some level of responsibility for acquiring new clients, but really don't have enough expertise around marketing. So we delegate that task and hope that we're getting people who know what they're doing. And typically I find that we're very disappointed in that, or in the results of doing things that way. Now, I don't know if that's your experience. Maybe you've been lucky and found someone who actually does know what they're doing. But what I've found is that people who purportedly know what they're doing with marketing may be good at marketing for other types of businesses, but because marketing a professional service is totally different and needs a different approach than marketing product-based businesses or even lower-level service-based businesses like hairdressers or plumbers or dentists, or not that dentists are low level, but they're sort of more in-demand type services than perhaps what most of us that I'm referring to in this podcast are dealing with. So my experience is that those people don't know enough about marketing a consultancy firm. And the typical approach, and I've complained about this often enough, of putting together websites that talk about who we are and what we do, that may work for a product-based business, but it doesn't work for a service or a consulting service type business. So what is your responsibility in marketing? If you are like me, didn't know enough about marketing to make it work, well, in the end, I made it my responsibility to find out how to make it work. And that was because if I wasn't going to do it, it wasn't going to happen. And I think in most businesses, and most of you listening to this podcast are probably in that situation yourself, that if you don't take responsibility to make marketing successful for your firm, it just isn't going to happen. So I'm going to suggest that your responsibility for marketing is to become the person who learns how to do it successfully. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything involved in marketing, but there's a time and a place where you need to be involved and do some of the work yourself, or at least learn what works and delegate it with close control over the process. So we can't afford to just hand over, almost abdicate a responsibility to someone else. And that's what I tended to do. And I think what most of us tend to do, we don't actually delegate responsibility, we abdicate responsibility. We let go of our responsibility because we don't have any confidence that we can do it. And rightly so, we probably can't. So we abdicate responsibility and hope that someone else is going to get it right. And in my experiences, that is a total failure, or at least a modicum of success through that process, and typically disappointing results because of that. So taking responsibility for marketing in your firm means learning from the successes. And what I did is stop looking externally for how marketing people, marketing consultants, people with a marketing background have succeeded, or how they do marketing in other situations. I looked at how do professional service firms succeed with marketing, and how do they do it differently from everyone else? So I became a student of marketing professional services. And what I found there was a totally different approach from marketing other products and low-level services, as I said. So it's a big learning curve. It's a long learning curve, and it's not something that will give you immediate satisfaction overnight. For me, it took a number of years. Now, it doesn't have to take you years to get this process right if you learn from the right people. And if I can be humble enough to suggest that you might want to learn from my mistakes and avoid making those mistakes yourself, then maybe we can shorten up that process for you and make it a number of weeks rather than a number of years in that learning curve. But you are able to take responsibility for marketing by getting advice and support from the right people who really know what they're doing. Now, how do you figure that out? Well, I think they need to be successful in running a consultancy practice or a professional service practice, and knowing how to acquire clients consistently and predictably in their own practice. So my recommendation is don't go out looking for marketing experts. Go on a hunt for people who've done what you want to do and grow a professional practice successfully. So your responsibility for marketing is to become the person who understands the strategy, designs the system and methodology, and delegates the process to somebody else, so that you ultimately don't have to be the one doing all the work, but you are the one who has responsibility for the process and the results. The way to make that happen is to learn from the successes, people who've built a business like you want to build. Find out how they've done it. Model their methods and their approaches, because you'll find that it's quite different. And often the way they've done it is hidden from the public eye because we're not out there advertising consultancy practices like many other people are. The answer to acquiring clients consistently and predictably for a consulting firm is not to be advertising your services. It's to be setting yourself up to be the accepted authority in your market. Because when people see you as the accepted authority, they automatically want to work with you. So becoming the accepted authority, you need to be the one taking responsibility for that. So if your website doesn't have your name on it at the moment, change that. People need to know who they're working with, or at least who is responsible for the team that they're working with. They want to know what your level of authority and expertise is around that process. And you don't inform them by giving them your qualifications and your experience on your website. You inform them by demonstrating your authority through content, through examples of results you've achieved for other people, through case studies, through the way that you actually present yourself and the process that you deliver your results through. And that's not about telling people each step of your service and how you work. It's about demonstrating the value you have and the results you achieve through the process. And ideally having other clients talk about their experience of your process and what they got from it, not how they did all the detail of going through the program, but how they enjoyed it, how they experienced it. Was it difficult? Was it challenging? Was it ultimately successful? If you can demonstrate your authority in that way, then you need to be able to take responsibility for putting yourself in that position, for creating the systems that highlight that and remove you ultimately from the doing of it, so that you can be the beneficiary of the results of that system. So take responsibility for doing that in your business. Taking responsibility for marketing is about doing things the right way, strategically, methodically, systematically, and ultimately successfully. So if you feel like you're fumbling around in the dark, not really knowing what to do, and the way that you're abdicating tasks to other people, hoping that they'll get it right, if that's your approach now, then I recommend have a look at a different way. Start to look at the successful approach from people who've done it in your field, who've grown a successful consulting business and potentially have sold it, because ultimately we want our consulting practices to have a value in itself. It doesn't mean you ever have to sell it, but ultimately one day you want to pass it on in one way or another, whether it's to someone else who buys you out, to members of your team who might buy into the business, or members of your family who might take it over and run it for you. Ultimately, there will come a time for succession in your business. So be prepared for that. Think long-term. And often we don't think long-term because we're so stuck on the challenges of surviving for today and how to take our business to the next level in the next year. But let's think longer than that and think, what does it take to establish a business that lasts forever? If you start thinking that way, you'll have a different approach. So hopefully you've picked up today through my bit of a rant around what it takes to grow a successful consultancy firm by taking responsibility for marketing and taking responsibility for becoming the accepted authority in your market. So if you'd like to know more, there's plenty of information available on my website at businessflightpath.com. You can access that. If you want to speak to me, there's opportunities to schedule a strategy session from the link on our website. Or if you like more free content, do a search for Greg Roworth on LinkedIn or Facebook, where daily, almost, I'm posting valuable information that will help you identify how you can become the accepted authority in your market. So I'll leave it there for this week. I hope you've had value from that. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Leave comments where you can. Give me feedback wherever you can. Let me know what you'd like me to address on this podcast in coming weeks. And I'd love to have that interaction with you. So that's it from me today. This has been Greg Roworth. I look forward to catching you next week.